Hello, my friends. I am thrilled to be here today. I actually could not wait to get in to have this discussion because we're actually continuing the conversation that we had last week about dyslexia. And I'm excited because we get to move from what is dyslexia, which we discussed last week, to what we can do to support students who have dyslexia. So I am thrilled today to introduce you to Forough Azimi. She is the Center Director for Lindamood-Bell Learning Processes in Southern California, the Westwood office. Lindamood-Bell has really pioneered programs that develop the sensory cognitive processes that underlie reading and comprehension. They are not only committed to intervention, they are committed to ongoing research and development and are constantly expanding their instructional programs. Their work and approach to intervention has really changed the lives of many of the students they serve. I cannot wait to jump into this conversation.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Forough. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. How are you doing?
Good, good. We were just both talking about the rain. It never rains here in Southern California. And all of a sudden today,
we have no idea how to react to it.
Absolutely. It's the driving home that's going to be the issue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I don't have to worry about that right now.
So many don't. Not yet, right?
Right. Exactly. Thank you for inviting me to come on. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yes, and I'm so glad you're here to help us really continue this discussion about dyslexia. In the last episode, Dr. Laura was here and she described what dyslexia is. And in that discussion, she dispelled a lot of myths that people have about dyslexia and specific learning disorders in reading. And today I really wanted to invite you on to really have a discussion about intervention. So now that we know what dyslexia is, how do we address the struggles that so many students face with dyslexia and that experience of having that struggle with reading? So I would love for us to kind of jump in there because the thing is that we've, within the past decade, there's been so many advances in our understanding of dyslexia and how to treat it. We know that it's an unexpected difficulty in reading. Mm-hmm. And we also know that there are pathways in the brain that are associated with reading that are activated in different ways in individuals with dyslexia. And we also know that intervention works for individuals with dyslexia, and it really helps them to become better readers. And I would love to kind of start there with, first, when we think about dyslexia, it's a broad spectrum. And I would love for you to start there with kind of that discussion on what do we mean when we're talking about dyslexia, because it is like a spectrum.
Exactly. And we know that we can have two kids who are exactly the same age, who may have that exact same diagnosis of dyslexia, and yet their symptoms are manifesting in completely different ways. So it's really important, even after we get that diagnosis, to hone in on specifically how that student is struggling with reading. So we know that for some students, those weaknesses mostly lie in their ability, what we call the mechanics of reading, right? Their ability to get the words off of the page and be able to read fluently and accurately. For other students, while the mechanics of reading might be kind of more of a strength, they have difficulty comprehending what they're reading and, just being able to follow along with a story or answer critical thinking questions. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure that when a student comes to us even after having gotten that diagnosis, that we're really able to kind of pinpoint where are they on this spectrum in terms of struggling with mechanics or comprehension. Or obviously, we know a lot of students might fall somewhere in the middle, right? Where there's a little bit of both that's hard for them. And so it's really important to be able to pinpoint where they are there to then know the best path forward in terms of their intervention.
Yeah, that's really a good point, because I think that that broad spectrum of how dyslexia manifests actually creates some of the confusion, where a parent would
Right.
say, oh, my kid can have dyslexia because they read fluently, but it's
Exactly.
really an issue with comprehension. Another parent might say, well, they're really struggling with just decoding the words on the page, and what you talk about in terms of the mechanics of reading. And it seems that those difficulties impact each other.
Right. Yes, exactly. So we think of, I'm imagining if I'm having to read a book and I'm struggling to get through just the text. I am, some of the decoding skills are making it really hard for me to read those words accurately, or I'm relying too much on those decoding skills. And so then my reading is really laborious and choppy and not fluent. Then of course, once I get to the end of that chapter, it is going to be so difficult for me to remember, what did I just read? Like, what was that really about? So we can absolutely see how weaknesses in the mechanics of reading can result in comprehension being difficult. And then on the other hand, if I'm not reading for comprehension, I'm just reading to get through a story, what that means is often we might make mistakes in reading and we might not monitor for meaning and therefore self-correct. So as an example is, if a student is reading a sentence and they read something like, the dog was tied to a tree. And again, they're not really reading for comprehension. They're just kind of flying through that story. They might just keep going and not catch that that was a mistake. Oh, a dog was tied to a tree. And so we can absolutely see how comprehension difficulties can lead to reading not being quite as accurate as it should be too. So they definitely kind of feed into each other. And that's why we're saying a lot of those kids fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum.
Right.
It's usually not very specifically one or the other.
Right. And I know we're going to talk about some of the programs later, but even when you gave that example, the dog was tied to the tree. Mm-hmm. If it's the dog was tied to the tree, that kind of activates a visualization of the dog being tied to the tree. And then you don't get that visual input to support your comprehension.
Exactly.
When it's erroneous.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. We use context so much when we're reading to constantly kind of be thinking, did that make sense? Did that make sense? And actually with our instruction, that's how we teach reading to students once they are at the point where they're reading stories. We allow them to get to the end of the sentence before we try to correct an error that they made, because we want to, of course, give them that chance of using that imagery to monitor what they're saying. Same with vocabulary, right? If we read that same sentence and we read the dog was tied to a pre or something, hopefully, again, our vocabulary would kick in and say, I don't have a picture for that word. There must be a mistake somewhere in there. So we have to use that comprehension and the concept imagery, which is the ability to create that movie in your mind to really make fluency and accuracy easier.
Right. And I think what you're describing is really the complexity of reading, because for people who aren't dyslexic, it just comes so naturally and it comes easily. But when you really break it apart in terms of what we're asking kids, students, and even adults to do who have difficulty in this area, it's very complex.
Absolutely.
In terms of what you're asking them to do, because you're pulling in so many different processes. You mentioned vocabulary and self-monitoring, which is an executive function. And then you have the decoding and the mechanics of reading and the visualization and the imagery. All of those things are happening while you are reading. And for so many that, things are breaking down in one or more of these areas.
Right. And that's why, so when we actually have students take our learning ability evaluation, when I meet with parents after that evaluation, we draw a Venn diagram, which is our model of language and literacy. And that's so that we can really break this very complex system of all of the reading and comprehension, all of it happening together. We don't think about the fact that all of these different systems in our brain are working together. And for students with a dyslexia diagnosis, like we said, one or a combination of these systems might have some weaknesses. So that's what we're looking for in our evaluation, so that parents can walk away knowing, like, this is exactly the part or parts that my student is struggling with. And again, the main point of that is so that we can make sure the intervention they're receiving is differentiated to meet their specific needs. It's not like a one size fits all for all dyslexic students being able to receive one program like that.
And that is so important, because I feel like the first step, and we've talked about that a lot on the podcast, is identification, knowing what the struggle is. And then what you're describing is where the struggle is, because even in the context of reading, the struggle can be in a number of different places, or a combination of those of different areas that impact reading.
Right.
And then that really dictates the kind of intervention that is needed once you know what you're looking at. Right.
Exactly.
And that really speaks to the ability to support a child, meet them where they are, and help them to become more fluent reader, and a reader who understands what it is that is on the page.
Exactly, right. Because we know that kids are incredible at using some of their strengths to compensate for some of their weaknesses, right? So some of those kind of foundational weaknesses might not pop up until a little bit of a later age, when maybe they're being asked to read multi-syllable words, or when suddenly they're being asked comprehension questions that are inferences and predictions, and they're not just direct recall questions, right? So there does need to be that really deep dive on their specific profile, and like we're talking about, their specific symptoms.
Absolutely. And that's why I often tell parents, when they come to see me and they've done an evaluation and now we know what it is, that the next step is finding an intervention that targets the area of difficulty. And that there are so many programs out there, and there are so many ways that people have purported to address this issue. But I always say you have to go with the program that has the most evidence. So if I'm going to make a recommendation, I'm going to be making a recommendation for an evidence-based program. And I would love for you to talk about the research behind some of your programs, because I think that's just such an important piece when we're thinking about intervention for students.
Exactly. Yes, I would love to talk about the research.
I know you do.
So, I will agree. I will say also, this is why I am at Lindamood-Bell 9 years after what I thought was going to be kind of a temporary summer job to check out what education is like. But it's because that's absolutely right, that we have to do research to see if a specific program and a specific method of intervention actually makes changes. And I think the big thing that we need to look at also is not only the amount of progress that a student might make before and after intervention, but that the amount of progress that they retain, right? We want to make sure that students are able to build these foundational skills and strengthen their reading and comprehension, but not always need that support and always need to, come back for multiple boosts of instruction. We want to basically teach them these processes so they can then carry that forward and apply it to curriculum and schoolwork and reading, even as the content gets more and more difficult. Mm-hmm. So that's what a lot of the research on Lindamood-Bell has been centered around. So one of the main things that our research looks at is looking at our intensive model of instruction. So we keep talking about, these processes in the brain and these pathways that need to exist for the component skills of reading and comprehension. And in order for intervention to truly change those pathways, build those pathways in a student's brain, and make sure that that becomes their new way of thinking about language and reading in general, that requires daily instruction. It's not something you can do twice a week and, hope that it makes that lasting difference. So universities have actually done research where they've scanned students' brains before and after our programs and seen that there's actually neurological changes taking place. So the language and imagery sections of the brain are communicating together. There's higher gray matter density and white matter. So what we see there is that by working with students 5 days a week on that really intensive schedule, we're seeing these changes in the students' brains. And then what the very exciting kind of phase of that is looking at a null period of no instruction at all, and then rescanning the brain again to see, did it stick, right? Like, is it just, they received a certain number of weeks and saw some change? And the incredibly exciting thing is to see that, yes, they retained those neurological changes. And that has a lot of implications, right? It's not about, quote unquote, curing dyslexia, but if you're rewiring how the brain is processing language and making those changes, then again, that sets them up for continued success down the line. And I think that we, like I said, very much focus on that research and make sure that we're continually doing studies on both of our programs to make sure that the research validates the recommendations that we're making to parents.
Right. And I have seen that research and I share that research with families. When I sit down and I'm going over the results of a child's evaluation and that profile shows dyslexia in some form, I will go over those because oftentimes parents feel, saddened about it. At the same time, they feel a relief because now they know what is going on. But the next question is, what do we do?
Right.
And, what does this mean for my child? And when you're able to share that research, it provides so much hope because you see the brain before and you see it after. You see that increase in activation in those parts of the brain that were underutilized and leading to difficulties with reading. And I think what's really important is that with those brain changes comes improvement in reading, which is what you want, right?
Exactly.
So you're changing the brain and then the brain is processing information in a more efficient way. And that efficiency translates into more accurate reading, more fluent reading, and then reading comprehension improves as a result.
Exactly. So when we test students, we're looking at these component skills of reading, and then we're taking a look at that underlying process. We call them sensory cognitive functions that underlie these component skills. So for example, we might test a student's their sight word base. How many words can they very quickly recognize on sight? Because we know that's a big part of reading fluency, not having to rely on decoding. So then we have a measure for their sight word base. Then we want to take it one step further and say, okay, so the underlying process in the brain that you need in order to even be able to acquire and retain sight words is something called symbol imagery. So your ability to visualize a certain number of symbols or letters in your mind. If you can only visualize 3 or 4 letters at a time, it's going to be so incredibly difficult to acquire sight words that are multiple syllables or the hundreds of sight words you might need as a 3rd grader, for example. And so that is specifically, once we kind of know, okay, is it the symbol imagery? Is it the phoneme awareness, right? Knowing how many sounds or syllables are within a word. Once we know which of these component skills and the underlying processes are hardest for that student, that's what we target with our programs. So for students who might struggle with symbol imagery or phoneme awareness, just reading fluency and accuracy in general, those are students who might come to us for a seeing stars instruction. As I mentioned, it's 5 days a week, anywhere from 2 to 6 hours per day. It really varies on the student's schedule. Then we also have our visualizing and verbalizing program, where that's for students who, again, maybe the reading mechanics are fine, but they're struggling with the comprehension portion. And that's because the underlying process for that is called concept imagery. So that's your ability to create an image for concepts you're reading about or hearing about, seeing that movie in your mind as you're reading. And then on the flip side, being able to verbalize what you did comprehend, because that's how you're going to prove if you understood what you read. And so we make a recommendation for one or a combination of seeing stars or visualizing and verbalizing, and also let parents know the amount of time we're recommending, and of course the instructional goals we'd like to get to at the end of that time. And I think, like we're saying, the idea that there is a solution, the idea that no matter how old your child is, we work with 4 years old to adults, and we know that neuroplasticity is there to make that change and to help students reach their potential, no matter their age, no matter their diagnosis, and that evaluation and initial recommendation can let parents know kind of like what is the next step. Yes, you received the diagnosis, but how can we kind of move forward to make reading and comprehension just more accessible for their child?
And I love that you mentioned, the age of the child, and it's not too late, because I think some parents, when they don't get the evaluation until later, they wonder about whether they've missed a window of opportunity.
Right.
So if you now have a fourth grader who's been struggling since kindergarten, but you were told he'll catch up, he'll grow out of it, and then you finally decide, I'm going to seek out an evaluation because he's still struggling with reading. It sounds like it's not too late because of the neuroplasticity of the brain.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest things. I hear that so much, and I'm sure you do too.
I do too.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking when I hear parents, and sometimes there's how did we not catch it earlier? But like we talked about, kids can compensate. Their brains figure out, how do I make this work, And unfortunately, what we know is a lot of those compensation techniques aren't sustainable, right? They get to some point where they can't rely on those anymore. And, but yeah, we know, like I said, we work with kids from 4 years old. We have middle schoolers, high schoolers, we have adults. It doesn't matter how old a student is. We know that by that direct intervention and of course, differentiating it to their needs. We might have, a 15-year-old and a 7-year-old both doing Seeing Stars, but their lesson plans would obviously look different and differentiated to what they need. And we know that that's one of our main philosophies, I will say, at Lindamood-Bell, is helping every student reach their potential no matter what their age is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and we talked about those compensatory strategies, and I've seen so many. And the thing is that the students who use those compensatory strategies are often working so hard to complete a process that comes easily for kids who don't have dyslexia. I've seen situations where a parent has read a book over and over to a child, and then that child has memorized the book. And so then when it's their turn to read the book, they're not actually reading. Exactly. They have just memorized the entire story, and their parents think that they're reading.
Right.
Or they've memorized what words look like. And so they rely on that visual memory for reading. But then when they come to a word that they've never seen before, they can't use decoding to figure out what the word is.
Right. And that's exactly why, like I said, sometimes it's just a bit later until some of those underlying issues are kind of discovered. I will say, for kids who struggle with the concept imagery process, those are the ones, where I'm talking to a parent of a high schooler who's taking 4 hours a night just to get through their homework because they're rereading things, they're trying to memorize, they're trying to get all the meaning that they can out of a story, but it's taking them, 5 times as long as their peers to do that. And it's got to be incredibly frustrating. My heart breaks for those students, but then at the same time, I'm hopeful because I'm like, it's okay. There's something we can do.
There are things we can do.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So that's always fun to be like, I know it's been hard so far. We can make it easier. Just let us get in there and write lesson plans just for you.
And so we know that students with dyslexia often have writing difficulties because, again, it can be related to the phonological processing where they can't apply phonemic awareness to writing. Do you also work on writing as well?
Yeah. So I, and this is more your expertise, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I usually talk to parents about how something like, also like a dysgraphia diagnosis can be just as broad as dyslexia. It might be, again, the mechanics of reading. So for example, a student who struggles with spelling, right? They might know a million words for the word big. They might know humongous, gigantic, etc., but they don't know how to spell it. So they might write big, and then they keep doing that over the course of the whole paragraph or whatever it is they're writing. So by the end of it, it looks a lot like they can verbalize a lot better than what they're able to write down. So that's a student where we would first address the spelling components. And then, of course, as we move into a less intensive phase of instruction, we move into what we call application to content, where we say, bring in your homework, bring in your schoolwork, whatever you have to work on. And so then we would apply that strengthened spelling to writing. For other students, It might be that they have a hard time verbalizing in writing, right? So that's more kind of conceptually, they struggle with getting their point across. So those are students where we would develop that written expression through visualizing and verbalizing, saying, your words make a movie in my mind. So if you're using 3 sentences where you should have used 7 or something, then I might not have quite as vivid of a movie as you had in your head when you were writing. So then we're really talking about, writing is written expression. So we want to make sure that they're able to convey all that great verbalization through their writing as well.
Absolutely. And it just seems that there's so much work that needs to be done for students who are struggling with the different aspects of dyslexia. And because we know that intensity works, that you really can't do this effectively, once a week and expect to see the kinds of changes we know are possible when this is done in an intense way. And it seems that summer for many students is just a golden opportunity to really get this intense instruction, particularly like right now. If students were identified as having dyslexia right now, and there's just a few months left in the school year, summer would be such a great opportunity to really target those brain pathways and improve those underlying reading skills.
Right. I completely agree. It is, we know we're asking a lot of our families and our students even to do 5 days a week of our instruction while they're in school. So summer is the time where we are absolutely the busiest. We do the 5 days a week, typically 4 hours a day. We call it reading camp to make it fun.
I love that.
but yeah, we know I definitely this year more than ever, we already know there's some learning loss that occurs every summer. And then there's this incredibly unique year we're almost done with, right. where of course that's going to have impacted students. So really our goal is to try to minimize kind of those 2 learning loss periods being compounded. And so of course, seeing students during the summer to build some of those pathways is ideal. Another thing I do want to point out is doing something 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, the kids feel that difference. You're doing something 20 hours a day. On Friday, you're going to be able to do something that was hard for you on Monday. And I do think that's a really motivating aspect of intensive instruction for kids, especially for students who, unfortunately, due to their diagnosis, might not have had the most positive experience surrounding school or academics and everything thus far. So them kind of noticing those changes and picking up on the progress they're making is also really exciting to see.
That is exciting. And I'm thinking about the student who maybe can't wait until summer.
Right.
And it really takes collaboration with schools and families to fit this intense instruction in. And I know that I've worked with a number of schools who have really been flexible with families who've seen kids with this profile and have allowed them to either start early or to miss out on certain periods of school so that they can go to a Lindamood-Bell Learning Center to get this intense instruction. So it's been wonderful to see that more people are realizing the value and the effectiveness of these intense programs, these evidence-based programs.
Right.
And then adapting the school day for a child who needs this additional support.
Absolutely. I mean, it is, difficult for even the schools who work specifically with kids with these profiles. We have that luxury of, and I really do believe it is a luxury to have one-on-one instruction and having those differentiated lesson plans. Those are things that for students who have to we want to accelerate their rate of learning, right? We don't want to make just 6 months of growth in 6 months of time. And so it has been really great to have schools work with us and know that, for right now, this is what this student needs. And ideally, we're, kind of putting them back into their regular school day after they receive that intervention. And we always welcome as much collaboration as possible with everyone on the student's team just to make sure we're all on the same page and just letting the school know that we're working on something real. There's research showing that it's going to work. And here's the testing that shows exactly where they are in relation to their peers. And here are the instructional goals that we're expecting to get to in this amount of time. So we welcome that collaboration because it takes a lot. It takes a village, right? There's really a lot of different services for these kids.
It really does. And things just work more smoothly and benefit the child in a broad way when there is effective collaboration between parents, the people doing the intervention, and the teachers in the school, supporting this work. And I think that there are just so many barriers to parents getting to the point of intervention. Initial barriers, just access to intervention and knowing that what dyslexia is, knowing that you can screen for it. You don't even have to have a full evaluation to be able to identify a student is at risk for dyslexia, identifying it, and then having a plan to target those pathways that we know are weaker in students with dyslexia. And I think another big hurdle for parents is just getting access to these interventions and knowing about them, right? Because if you don't know, it's hard to make an informed decision about what intervention or what a school might be offering for your child to address some of the areas of difficulty. And I think that's a huge barrier, is just not knowing that this research exists and it's been out there for such a long time, but yet still so many people don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's and because like you mentioned in the beginning too, there are a lot of different programs, and I know how kind of tough of a journey parents are on when they are first kind of coming to that realization, okay, maybe I need to get this testing. What's the next step, et cetera. So it really is just about raising as much awareness as possible to let them know, yeah, these programs exist. There are specific things that are validated and research shows make those changes, et cetera. I know we've done, Lindamood-Bell in general has partnered with schools and districts across the country to bring our programs into the classrooms and even small group instruction within classes, et cetera. We also have workshops that are nationwide for teachers to be able to learn the basics of our programs. So there are ways to really get the programs out and make sure that they're being implemented on as wide of a scale as possible. And obviously my dream is to just continue that. I worked in the school partnerships division in Colorado, where we did implement this in multiple schools in a county. And just, it's really wonderful to see when you are targeting the foundations and not just diving straight into practicing some of these skills, the difference that makes for all students, not just those with a specific diagnosis.
Right. And I think that's really important, because a child with dyslexia is different than a child who's just struggling with the content of a particular class. And so the intervention has to be different. And like you, I think I've been really excited seeing over the years more and more school districts actually paying for Lindamood-Bell intervention for students. And 5 years ago, I wasn't seeing that. I was really having to push and make those recommendations in my reports. And then some schools would say that we can't do that. But I'm seeing more and more school districts actually paying for the Lindamood-Bell interventions. And I'm assuming that's because they know that it works. And you can do so much in a shorter period of time rather than spread it out 30 minutes, I might get in trouble for saying this, but 30 minutes a week for 5 years. Why not spend one summer doing it intensely and getting the results so quickly?
Exactly. I think, and it obviously varies district by district and the partnerships that we've done, et cetera. But I also, when I was working in Atlanta, we were doing what we call a learning center on campus, where we were actually bringing our staff from the Lindamood-Bell Center into a middle school and doing small group instruction with them. And even with them, it was, less quote unquote intensive than what we might do in the center. It was still an hour a day of those small group settings, still 5 days a week. So we got that model in. And you can still see those changes. Now we're stretching it out over a whole school year, of course, which is a little bit longer than what we would see in the Learning Center. But as you said, it does make more sense in the long run. Now you have a whole slew of kids who over their 6th grade year really improved their reading or comprehension, whichever it was, and don't necessarily need that going on to 7th, 8th, 9th, etc. So it's just about that long-term kind of thinking.
Absolutely. And you want, like you said before, you want those lasting effects, right?
Yes.
You want these changes to last. And the end result is basically a child, an adolescent, an adult who is reading more accurately, reading more fluently, having a better understanding of what it is that they read, and that they enjoy the reading process.
Yes.
And they enjoy learning because now they can read to gain information and to critically analyze different topics. All of that is ultimately what you want.
Right. Yes. We, as you might imagine, most everyone who works at Lindamood-Bell is an avid reader. So our ultimate goal is absolutely to get kids to a place where they can pick up a book that is interesting to them and access it independently. That's what will unlock their love of reading, right? Not necessarily just being able to kind of access the content, but picking up something that they really would fall in love with. That is our ultimate goal. And of course, the success stories we love to hear from families when they're saying, I'm catching him reading up at night and et cetera. I'm just like, yes, please continue bringing those stories in for us.
Absolutely. The success stories are the best because I've done evaluations on kids in 1st grade, 2nd grade who were so behind in their reading, 4th grade, and they're 2 years behind in their reading. And then I've also seen them with the intervention, in many cases, a Lindamood-Bell intervention in high school, and they're applying to colleges, and I'm retesting for accommodations, and they're reading at age level and grade level.
Yes.
And that's what you want.
Exactly. Those are our absolute favorite cases. I have one of my first students who, when I was a lead teacher back in Atlanta, she still sends me emails. She's about to graduate college, actually. This is her last year there. So it's so great to see how, again, really building those foundations and then just making it so they can take those and apply them year after year. I think that builds up so much confidence. Yes, we love the test scores. Yes, we love that, they can get better grades in school, but those quality changes, I think, are so amazing to see. Just the renewed sense of confidence and self-esteem and volunteering to read in class, that's what we live for.
And that's the reason we do what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely our why.
I cannot thank you enough for sharing the information that you have with our listeners. I think it really helps, again, for parents to be informed when making decisions or agreeing to interventions for their children. And this has been very, very helpful. So thank you.
It is my pleasure. Thank you.
And I know that people are going to have questions, as they always do. What is the best way for people to learn more about Lindamood-Bell programs and, determine whether or not this would be a good approach for their child?
Sure. So I will guide everyone towards our website, lindamoodbell.com. There's so much research on there. There's information about the programs and specific symptoms that you might see in your child and kind of let you know which of our programs might be the best fit. And then you can also look at the locations on there to find a location that's best for you. We have them all across the country, all across the world. So if you just look on the locations tab and you can call the learning center that's closest to you. If you'd like to speak with me directly, I'm the center director of the Westwood Learning Center, but any of our center directors would be able to kind of give you more information about everything we discussed and whether it would be a right fit for each child.
Excellent. And we will definitely put links to the website in the show notes. So thank you so much again. It has just been a pleasure.
Thank you. It was very fun. I really had a great time.
I am really grateful to Forough for coming on the podcast and talking about intervention, because I don't think we talk about it enough. And if you sit with a child or an adult who struggles with reading, you really get insight into how they process information and how they learn. There is an achievement gap between dyslexic and typical readers that can be seen as early as first grade, and this difference persists into adolescence. There are also evidence-based, efficient, and inexpensive screening tools that can identify kids at risk for dyslexia as early as first grade. And there are evidence-based interventions that ensure that children with dyslexia not only survive, but thrive. We want to be part of the community that disseminates 21st century knowledge to educators, policymakers, and the parents of dyslexic children. If you want to be part of that community, join our email list at childnexus.com and we will involve you in the conversation. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.